The dust storm came from nowhere, swallowing the wagon trail between San Antonio and Laredo in a choking brown cloud that turned noon into twilight. Clara Graham pulled her shawl over her mouth and nose, but the grit found its way past the fabric, coating her teeth and burning her eyes until tears streaked muddy trails down her cheeks. She had been traveling alone for 3 days since the stage had broken an axle outside of Uvalde, and the driver had told her to wait while he rode for help that never came. When her water ran out on the second day, she had started walking south, certain she could reach Laredo before her strength gave out. She had been wrong. The fever started that morning in July of 1878, a deep trembling in her bones that had nothing to do with the oppressive heat. By midday, her legs moved on instinct alone, each step a monumental effort of will. The sun blazed overhead like a furnace, and the landscape shimmered with heat that rose from the baked earth in visible waves. Clara knew she was dying. She had seen it before back in St. Louis when cholera swept through the tenements where she had grown up. But this was different. This was just her body giving up, surrendering to exhaustion and dehydration and the relentless Texas sun that showed no mercy to the foolish or desperate. When her knees finally buckled, she fell forward into the dust without even putting her hands out to catch herself. She lay there, her cheek pressed against ground so hot it burned, and she could not find the strength to lift her head. Her arms would not respond to her commands. Her neck felt like it was made of lead. The world tilted and spun, and she wondered if this patch of barren earth would be her grave, if the buzzards already circling overhead would pick her bones clean before anyone found her. The sound of hoofbeats seemed like a dream at first, distant and unreal. Then a shadow fell across her, blessedly blocking the sun, and she heard a man's voice, low and urgent. Strong hands rolled her gently onto her back, and she tried to open her eyes, but her lids were too heavy, crusted with dust and salt. "Easy now," the voice said, and there was something in it that made her want to trust him, whoever he was. "I have got you." She felt herself being lifted, cradled against a chest that smelled of leather and horse and clean sweat. The motion of being carried should have frightened her, should have triggered some instinct to fight or flee, but she had nothing left. Her head lolled to one side, too heavy for her weakened neck to support, and she felt his hand come up to support it, his palm warm against her skull as he adjusted his grip to hold her more securely. "Come on, girl," he murmured, and she realized he was walking quickly, his boots crunching in the gravel. "Stay with me now. My camp is just over that rise. You're going to be all right." She wanted to tell him she was sorry for being a burden, that he should just leave her and save himself the trouble, but her tongue was swollen and her lips were cracked and bleeding. No words came. The world faded in and out, consciousness slipping through her fingers like water. When awareness returned, she was lying on something soft, a bedroll perhaps, in the shade of a canvas tarp that had been rigged between two mesquite trees. The relief from the direct sun was immediate and profound. She tried again to lift her head but failed, a small whimper escaping her throat at the effort. "Do not try to move yet," the man said, and then he was kneeling beside her, one hand sliding beneath her head to lift it with infinite gentleness. "Let me help you." Clara's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time she saw her rescuer clearly. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of mesquite honey. His dark hair was long enough to touch his collar, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, trail-worn denim and a faded blue shirt, a bandana knotted at his throat. There was something in his face that spoke of kindness, of a man who had seen hardship but had not let it make him hard. "I am going to give you some water first," he said, his hand still cradling her head. "Just small sips. If you drink too fast, you will be sick." He brought a canteen to her lips, tilting it carefully so just a few drops spilled into her mouth. The water was warm, but it was the most glorious thing Clara had ever tasted. She swallowed convulsively, wanting more, and he let her have another small sip before pulling the canteen away. "I know you want more, but we have to go slow," he said. "Trust me on this. I have seen men drink themselves sick after going without." She managed a tiny nod, and he smiled, his whole face transforming with the expression. He had a good smile, genuine and warm. He gave her another sip, then another, spacing them out over what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes. When he finally judged she had enough water for the moment, he set the canteen aside and reached for a pot that sat near a small fire. "I made soup this morning," he said, "just beans and salt pork, nothing fancy, but it will give you strength. Are you ready to try eating something?" Clara wanted to say yes, but her voice still would not work properly. She managed another nod, and he lifted a spoonful from the pot, blowing on it to cool it before bringing it to her lips. She was still too weak to lift her own head, so he kept his hand there, supporting her weight as if it was nothing, as if he could hold her like that all day without tiring. The soup was simple, but it tasted like salvation. She swallowed the first spoonful and then opened her mouth for another like a baby bird. He fed her slowly, patiently, never rushing, always making sure each bite had cooled enough that it would not burn her mouth. Between spoonfuls, he gave her more water, and gradually Clara felt a tiny bit of strength seeping back into her limbs. "My name is Harrison Quade," he said as he fed her. "I am driving a small herd up to Laredo to meet the train. I was scouting ahead for water when I saw you fall. You are lucky I found you when I did. Another hour or two in that sun, and you would not have made it." Clara tried to speak, managed only a hoarse croak. He shook his head. "Do not try to talk yet. Just focus on getting some food in you. You can tell me your story when you're stronger." He continued feeding her, spoonful by patient spoonful, until she had eaten perhaps half a bowl. When she turned her face away from the next offered bite, he did not push, just set the bowl aside and lowered her head back down to the bedroll with the same gentleness he had shown throughout. "You rest now," he said. "I am going to wet a cloth and clean some of this dust off you. It will help you feel better." True to his word, he dampened a rag from his canteen and began carefully wiping the dirt from her face. His touch was light, almost reverent, as if she were something precious that might break. Clara felt tears prick her eyes at the simple kindness of it. In her 22 years, she had known precious little gentleness from anyone. Her father had died when she was 6, and her mother had worked herself to death in a factory by the time Clara was 14. Since then, she had been alone, scraping by as a seamstress and taking in laundry, saving every penny for a new start somewhere else, anywhere else. When she had received a letter from a distant cousin in Laredo offering her work as a teacher in the new schoolhouse they were building, it had seemed like Providence. She had spent the last of her money on the stagecoach ticket and left St. Louis without looking back. Now here she was, nearly dead in the dust, being cared for by a stranger whose name she had only just learned. "There," Harrison said, sitting back on his heels to study his work. "That is better. How are you feeling? Can you stay awake for a little while longer, or do you need to sleep?" She tried again to speak, and this time managed a whisper. "Thank you." His smile returned, lighting his eyes. "No need for thanks. Any decent person would do the same." Clara was not sure that was true. She had seen enough of the world to know that many people would have ridden right past her without a second glance. But she did not have the strength to argue, and the exhaustion was pulling at her like a riptide. Her eyes slid closed despite her best efforts to keep them open. "Sleep," Harrison said softly. "I will be right here. You're safe now." She believed him, which was perhaps the strangest thing of all. She had learned long ago not to trust easily, not to rely on anyone but herself. But something in his voice, in his gentle hands, made her want to trust him. As consciousness slipped away, she heard him moving around the camp, the soft clink of tin plates, the quiet sound of him talking to his horse. The sounds were oddly comforting, and she let herself drift away on them like a boat on a quiet river. When Clara woke again, the sun had moved far to the west, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The oppressive heat of the day had eased to something more bearable, though the air was still warm against her skin. She took a moment to assess herself, to test her body's capabilities. Her head still felt heavy, but not impossibly so. When she tried to lift it, she succeeded, though the effort made her dizzy. "Easy," Harrison said, appearing at her side as if he had been watching for signs of her waking. "Do not sit up too fast. Here, let me help you." He slid an arm behind her shoulders and lifted her carefully until she was half sitting, then propped his saddle behind her as a backrest. The change in position made her head swim, but it passed quickly, and she was grateful to be upright, to feel more like a person and less like a corpse. "How long did I sleep?" she asked, her voice still raspy but stronger than before. "A few hours," Harrison said. "It is good. Your body needed the rest. Are you hungry? I kept the soup warm." Clara realized she was ravenous. "Yes, please." This time, when he brought her the bowl, she was able to hold her own head up, though her hands still trembled too much to manage the spoon. He fed her again without comment, as if there was nothing unusual about a grown woman needing to be tended like a child. When the bowl was empty, she felt almost human again, though still desperately weak. "Can you tell me your name?" Harrison asked, settling down cross-legged beside her bedroll. "Clara Graham," she said. "I was traveling to Laredo from St. Louis. The stagecoach broke down outside Uvalde, and the driver left to get help but never came back. I waited 2 days and then started walking. I ran out of water, and I thought I could make it, but clearly I was wrong about that." Harrison's jaw tightened. "The driver left you alone? Just left you out there?" "There were some buildings nearby, an old way station. I was not completely alone. But no one came, and I had a position waiting for me in Laredo. I am supposed to teach school. I could not just wait indefinitely." "You should have waited," Harrison said, but his tone was not judgmental, just matter of fact. "This country will kill you if you're not prepared for it. How much farther to Laredo?" "I am not certain. Maybe 30 miles? I lost track of distance after the first day of walking." "We are about 25 miles out," Harrison said. "I was planning to reach the town tomorrow, but that was before I found you. You need more time to recover before you are fit to travel." "I cannot delay you," Clara protested. "You have your cattle to deliver. I can rest here and you can send someone back for me from town." He looked at her like she had suggested setting herself on fire. "I am not leaving you alone out here. What kind of man do you think I am?" "A kind one," Clara said. "But I've already been enough of a burden." "You are not a burden," Harrison said firmly. "Listen, Miss Graham, I am not in that much of a hurry. The buyer in Laredo is not expecting me for another 3 days. We have time. You rest tomorrow, get your strength back, and we will ride into town together the day after. I have an extra horse that can carry you. It will be easier on you than trying to walk." Clara felt her eyes burning again. That treacherous prickle of tears that came from being shown unexpected kindness. "I do not know how to repay you." "You do not owe me anything," Harrison said. "Out here, people help each other. It is how we survive." They sat in companionable silence as the sun finished setting and the sky turned deep purple, then black. Harrison built up the fire and made coffee in a battered pot, the rich smell mixing with the scent of sage and dust. He gave her a cup, sweetened with a precious bit of sugar, and she wrapped her hands around the tin mug and savored both the warmth and the bitter taste. "Where are you from?" Clara asked. "Originally, I mean. You said you are driving cattle up from the south?" "I have a small ranch about 40 miles southwest of here," Harrison said. "My father started it 15 years ago when I was just a boy. He died last winter, left the place to me. It is not much, just a few hundred acres and maybe 80 head of cattle, but it is mine. I am taking 20 head to sell in Laredo, hoping to get enough money to see me through to next spring. It has been a hard year." "I'm sorry about your father," Clara said. "Thank you. He was a good man. Taught me everything I know about ranching, about how to survive out here. He would have liked you, I think. He always admired people with courage, and it takes courage to strike out on your own the way you did." "Or foolishness," Clara said wryly. Harrison chuckled. Maybe a little of both. But I mean it. It is not easy for a woman traveling alone. You must want this teaching position badly. I do, Clara said. It is a chance for a real life, a respectable life. I have been barely getting by for years, living in a tenement, working my fingers raw just to afford bread and coal. When my cousin wrote and said they were building a school and needed a teacher, I saw it as my one opportunity to have something better. I studied hard when I was younger, got as much education as I could. I can read and write and do figures. I thought I could teach children, help them have opportunities I never had. That is a fine dream, Harrison said quietly. We need more teachers out here, people who care about giving children a future. Laredo is growing fast. There are a lot of families settling in the area now that the railroad has come through. They will be lucky to have you. They talked late into the night, the conversation flowing easily despite having just met. Harrison told her about life on the ranch, about learning to rope and brand, about long days under the sun and the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. Clara told him about St. Louis, about the crowded streets and the factory smoke, about the noise and the poverty and the constant struggle. She found herself watching him as he spoke, noticing the way the firelight played across his features, the way his hands moved expressively when he described something he cared about. He was handsome in a rugged, unself-conscious way, but more than that, he was genuine. There was no artifice to him, no pretense. What you saw was what you got, and what Clara saw was a good man, decent and hardworking and kind. When she finally could not keep her eyes open any longer, Harrison insisted she take his bedroll while he made do with a blanket on the ground. She was too tired to argue. As she drifted off to sleep, she heard him moving around the camp, checking on the horses, banking the fire. The sounds were becoming familiar, comforting. She fell asleep feeling safer than she had in longer than she could remember. The next day passed in a haze of rest and slow recovery. Harrison made her eat regularly, small meals throughout the day to build her strength without overtaxing her system. He had ridden out in the morning to check on his cattle, leaving her alone for a few hours, but he returned by midday with fresh water from a creek he had found about a mile west. I moved the herd closer, he explained as he refilled their canteens. They are just over that rise now. That way I can keep an eye on them and on you at the same time. Clara was sitting up on her own now, though she still tired quickly. You did not have to do that. I would have been fine here alone. Maybe, Harrison said, but I feel better knowing you're close by. Besides, the water is closer here. Better grazing, too. He spent the afternoon doing small tasks around the camp while Clara rested, mending a bridle, cleaning his rifle, whittling a piece of wood into some shape she could not quite discern. She watched him work, appreciating the economical way he moved, the competence in every gesture. He was a man comfortable in his own skin, at ease in this harsh landscape that had nearly killed her. Tell me more about your ranch, she said at one point, craving the sound of his voice. He looked up from the bridle he was working on, his face brightening. What do you want to know? Everything. What does it look like? What is your house like? Do you have anyone helping you run it? It is not fancy, Harrison said, setting the bridle aside. The house is adobe, just 3 rooms but solid. My father built it to last. There is a barn for the horses and a corral, a windmill for water. The land is good, at least the part near the creek is good. Plenty of grass for the cattle, some cottonwood trees for shade. In the spring, the whole place blooms with wildflowers, more colors than you can imagine. It is beautiful then. It sounds wonderful, Clara said, and she meant it. She tried to picture it. This little ranch in the middle of nowhere, a place carved out of the wilderness through sheer determination and hard work. It can be lonely, Harrison admitted. I have a couple of hands who come by during roundup and branding time, but most of the year it is just me. I do not mind the solitude most of the time, but sometimes I wish for someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone to share it with. There was something wistful in his voice that made Clara's heart ache. She understood loneliness, had lived with it as a constant companion for so long she had almost forgotten what it felt like to connect with another person. Yet here she was, connecting with this man she had known for barely a day, feeling things she had no business feeling. "What about you?" Harrison asked. "Once you're settled in Laredo, teaching at the school, what are you hoping for? What do you want your life to look like?" Clara considered the question carefully. "I want stability," she said finally. "I want to wake up in the morning and know where my next meal is coming from. I want a place that is mine, even if it is just a small room somewhere. I want to feel like I matter, like I am contributing something to the world." "Is that too modest a dream?" "Not at all," Harrison said. "Those are the things that make life worth living. The rest, the big dreams and grand ambitions, they are fine. But it is the day-to-day living that really counts. A home, work you care about, people you love. That is what matters." "People you love." The phrase hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Clara felt her cheeks warm and looked away, suddenly flustered. She barely knew this man. She had no right to be thinking about love, about futures that involved anyone but herself. And yet she could not seem to stop her mind from wandering down those dangerous paths, imagining what it might be like to share that little adobe house, to watch the wildflowers bloom in spring, to have someone to talk to at the end of each day. That evening, as the sun set in another spectacular display of color, Harrison helped Clara walk around the camp to test her strength. Her legs were shaky, but they held her weight, and though she had to lean on his arm for support, she managed a full circuit without collapsing. "You are doing well," Harrison said. "I think you will be ready to ride tomorrow. We will take it slow, stop often to rest, but we should be able to make Laredo by evening." "I am ready," Clara said, though the thought of leaving the safety of this camp, of returning to the real world, filled her with an unexpected reluctance. Here, in this bubble outside of time and space, it was just the two of them. No expectations, no obligations, no complicated futures to navigate. Just two people who had found each other in the wilderness and forged an unlikely connection. But of course it could not last. She had a position waiting for her in Laredo, a future she had sacrificed everything to reach. And Harrison had a ranch to run, a life that did not include a penniless teacher from St. Louis. This was just a brief interlude, a moment of grace in an otherwise harsh world. She needed to remember that. That night, lying in the bedroll that still smelled faintly of Harrison, of leather and sage and something uniquely him, Clara stared up at the stars and tried to memorize this feeling. The warmth of the fire, the sound of his breathing from a few feet away, the vast silence of the Texas night. She wanted to remember it all, to carry it with her into whatever came next. She must have drifted off eventually because she woke to find the sun already risen, and Harrison crouched by the fire, making breakfast. He looked up when he heard her stir and smiled that warm smile that did dangerous things to her heart. "Morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Clara said, and it was true. She felt almost like herself again. The crushing weakness of the previous days replaced by a bone-deep tiredness that was manageable. "Thank you for everything, Harrison. I mean it. You saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same, see," he said, but he looked pleased by her gratitude. "No," Clara said firmly. "Not everyone. You are a good man, Harrison Quade. I hope you know that." He ducked his head, suddenly bashful, and busied himself with the coffee pot. They ate a simple breakfast of hardtack and bacon, washing it down with strong black coffee, and then Harrison helped her pack up the camp. He moved with practiced efficiency, and within an hour everything was loaded onto the pack horse, and they were ready to depart. Harrison had saddled his own horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Duke, and brought forward a pretty sorrel mare for Clara. "This is Rosie," he said, patting the mare's neck. "She is gentle and sure-footed. She will take good care of you." Clara had ridden before, though not often and not recently. Harrison helped her into the saddle, his hand steadying her until she found her seat. The height made her dizzy for a moment, but it passed, and then Harrison was mounting his own horse and they were moving out, leaving the little camp behind. They traveled slowly, Harrison keeping Duke to a walk and frequently checking over his shoulder to make sure Clara was managing all right. The cattle followed behind, a small herd that lowed and kicked up dust as they ambled along. The day was hot, but not unbearably so, and Harrison made sure they stopped often to rest in whatever shade they could find and drink water. As they rode, they continued to talk, the conversation ranging from the mundane to the personal. Harrison told her about growing up on the ranch, about his mother who had died of fever when he was 10, about learning to survive in a land that gave nothing easily. Clara told him about her own childhood, about the crowded tenement where she had grown up, about her mother's tired eyes and worn hands, about the hunger that was a constant companion. "You have come so far," Harrison said at one point, genuine admiration in his voice. "To pull yourself up out of that and make something of yourself, that takes real strength, real determination." "I did not have much choice," Clara said. "It was fight or give up, and I am too stubborn to give up." "Stubborn is good," Harrison said. "You need stubborn out here." By late afternoon, they could see Laredo in the distance, a sprawl of buildings hugging the bend of the Rio Grande. The sight should have filled Clara with relief, with excitement. Instead, she felt her stomach twist with something that felt uncomfortably like dread. Once they reached town, this strange interlude would be over. Harrison would sell his cattle and return to his ranch, and she would begin her new life as a teacher, and probably they would never see each other again. The thought was unbearable. As if sensing her mood, Harrison reined Duke closer so they were riding side by side. "What is wrong?" he asked. "You have gone quiet." Clara forced a smile. "Just tired, I think. It has been a long day." But Harrison was not fooled. He studied her face for a long moment, his honey-colored eyes searching hers, and she saw the exact moment he understood. His expression shifted, softened, filled with something that made her breath catch. "Clara," he said quietly, "I have been thinking about what comes next, about saying goodbye." "You have to get back to your ranch," Clara said, trying to sound practical, trying to ignore the way her heart was hammering. "And I have a position to take up. We both have our responsibilities." "We do," Harrison agreed, "but that does not mean this has to be the end. Laredo is not that far from my ranch, maybe 50 miles. I could come visit, bring supplies into town every few weeks. We could see each other, get to know each other better, if you wanted to, I mean." Hope flared in Clara's chest, bright and terrifying. "I would like that," she said. "I would like that very much." Harrison's face broke into a grin, wide and genuine and utterly infectious. "Good. That is good. Because I'm not ready to say goodbye to you yet, Clara Graham. I know we have only known each other a few days, but I feel like I have known you much longer. Like I have been waiting to meet you. Does that sound crazy?" "No," Clara whispered. "It does not sound crazy at all." They rode the rest of the way into town in a comfortable silence, but now it was charged with possibility, with the promise of something more. As they entered the main street of Laredo, Clara took in the bustling activity, the false-fronted buildings, the crowds of people going about their business. It was smaller than St. Louis, but it felt alive, vital, full of opportunity. Harrison helped her navigate to the address her cousin had provided. A neat little house on the edge of town where a middle-aged woman answered the door and exclaimed in relief at Clara's arrival. "We were so worried," Mrs. Gentry said, ushering Clara inside. "When the stage company sent word about the breakdown, we did not know what had become of you. Thank the Lord you are safe." Harrison carried in Clara's small trunk, the only luggage she owned, and set it down in the front hall. Mrs. Gentry thanked him profusely, offering payment for his trouble, but he waved her off. "I was happy to help," he said. "Just glad I found Miss Graham when I did." He turned to Clara, suddenly awkward now that they had an audience. "I have to go see about selling those cattle before it gets dark," he said, "but I will come by tomorrow before I head back to the ranch, if that's all right." "Please do," Clara said. "I would like that very much." Their eyes met and held, and Clara saw everything she was feeling reflected back at her. The connection, the longing, the hope for something neither of them had expected to find. Then Harrison tipped his hat to Mrs. Gentry, nodded to Clara, and was gone, leaving her standing in the doorway watching him walk away. "Well," Mrs. Gentry said, a knowing smile on her round face. "He seems like a very nice young man, very helpful." "He is," Clara said softly. "He saved my life." True to his word, Harrison appeared at Mrs. Gentry's door the next morning, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. He asked if Clara felt well enough for a walk, and with Mrs. Gentry's permission they strolled through the town, Harrison pointing out various establishments and introducing her to people they passed on the street. "I sold the cattle for a good price," Harrison said as they walked. "Enough to get me through the winter and then some. I need to head back today, make sure the ranch has not fallen apart in my absence, but I will be back in 3 weeks. I have to pick up supplies anyway, so I will come find you. We can have dinner at the hotel if you would like." "I would like that very much," Clara said. They stopped at the edge of town, looking out over the Rio Grande, the river running brown and sluggish in the summer heat. Harrison took her hand, his work-roughened fingers tangling with hers. "I know this is fast," he said. "I know we are still practically strangers. But I feel something for you, Clara. Something I have never felt before. I want to see where this goes, if you are willing." Clara squeezed his hand, her throat tight with emotion. "I feel it too," she admitted. "I did not come to Texas looking for this, but I'm so glad I found it. Found you." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles, and the simple gesture sent warmth flooding through her entire body. 3 weeks, he said. "I will be counting the days." "So will I," Clara whispered. They stood there for a long moment, neither wanting to be the first to let go, to break the spell. But eventually Harrison had to leave, had to begin the long ride back to his ranch. Clara walked him to where Duke was tied outside Mrs. Gentry's house, and she stood on the porch watching him ride away until he disappeared from sight. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Clara met with the town council about her teaching position, learning that the school would open in September, giving her a few weeks to prepare. She was given a small salary to live on in the meantime, and a tiny house near the schoolhouse that would be hers for as long as she held the position. It was just 2 rooms simply furnished, but it was more than she had dared to hope for, a place that was truly hers. She spent her days preparing lesson plans, organizing the schoolhouse, and getting to know the families whose children she would teach. Laredo was a mix of Anglo settlers and Mexican families who had lived in the region for generations, and Clara was determined to serve all of them equally. She spent hours practicing her Spanish with Mrs. Gentry, who was fluent, wanting to be able to communicate with all her students. But beneath all the activity, beneath the excitement of starting her new life, was a constant awareness of Harrison. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments, remembering the gentleness of his hands, the warmth of his smile, the way he had cared for her when she was at her most vulnerable. She counted down the days until his promised visit, anticipation building in her chest like a physical pressure. When he finally appeared on a warm afternoon in August, riding Duke down the main street with a pack horse trailing behind, Clara's heart leaped at the sight of him. She had been sitting on her porch reading when she saw him, and she was on her feet and hurrying toward him before she even realized she was moving. Harrison dismounted and caught her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. "Clara," he said, his face buried in her hair, "God, I have missed you." "I missed you too," she said, laughing with pure joy. "So much." They spent the next 2 days together, every moment Harrison could spare from his business in town. He took her riding along the river, showed her the countryside surrounding Laredo, told her stories about the land and its history. They had dinner at the hotel as promised, and Clara wore the one nice dress she owned, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Harrison could not stop looking at her, and she found she did not mind his attention, did not want him to look anywhere else. On the second evening, they sat on the porch of her little house, watching the sun set and painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Harrison took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I have to head back tomorrow," he said reluctantly, "but I have been thinking. What if I came back every 2 weeks instead of 3? I could arrange my work on the ranch to allow for more frequent trips. I do not want to go so long without seeing you again." "I would love that," Clara said, "but I do not want you to neglect your responsibilities because of me." "You are not a distraction," Harrison said firmly. "You are important to me. The most important thing, if I am being honest. Everything else can be arranged around that." Clara felt tears prick her eyes at the simple declaration. "You are important to me too," she whispered. "More important than I ever thought anyone could be." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, with an intensity that would have frightened her if it had not felt so absolutely right. When his lips met hers, gentle and questioning, she kissed him back with all the longing and hope and affection she had been carrying for the past 3 weeks. The kiss was sweet and tender, full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you, Clara Graham," he said softly. "I think I have been falling since the moment I found you in the dust and you looked at me with those brave, determined eyes." "I am falling in love with you too," Clara said, the words feeling like both a confession and a promise. "I do not know how it happened so fast, but I cannot seem to help it." "Then do not help it," Harrison said, smiling. "Let yourself fall. I will catch you. I promise." And he did. Over the next months, as summer faded into fall and fall into winter, Harrison made the journey to Laredo faithfully every 2 weeks. Sometimes he stayed for just a day, sometimes for 3 or 4 if he could manage it. He attended the opening of the school and sat in the back of Clara's classroom, beaming with pride as she taught her first lessons. He helped her repair a leak in her roof and brought her firewood for the winter. He introduced her to his ranch hands when they came into town, and slowly Clara began to feel like she was part of his life, not just an addendum to it. In turn, Clara opened herself to him in ways she had never opened to anyone. She told him her fears and her dreams, her memories of hunger and hardship, her fierce determination to make something of herself. She told him about the loneliness that had been her constant companion for so long and how he had chased it away just by being himself, by caring about her, by showing up again and again. By Christmas, they were deeply, irrevocably in love. Harrison brought her a gift, a beautiful hand-carved wooden box with her initials inlaid on the lid. "I made it myself," he said shyly, watching her face as she opened it. "Worked on it in the evenings after the chores were done. I thought you could keep your things in it, letters or keepsakes or whatever you want." Clara traced the letters with her fingers, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of it. "It is beautiful," she said. "The most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. Thank you, Harrison." She had a gift for him too, a new shirt she had sewn from fabric she had bought with her carefully saved salary. It was nothing fancy, just sturdy cotton in a deep green that matched his eyes, but she had put hours of work into making sure every stitch was perfect. "I love it," Harrison said, holding it up to admire her handiwork. "I will wear it every time I come to town. That way you will know I'm thinking of you." They spent a quiet Christmas together, attending church services and then having dinner with Mrs. Gentry and her family. It felt domestic and comfortable and right, like a glimpse of the future they were building together. In February, as the winter began to ease and the first hints of spring appeared in the greening grass and budding trees, Harrison came to town with a specific purpose. He found Clara at the schoolhouse tidying up after dismissing her students for the day, and he waited patiently while she finished her tasks. "Walk with me?" he asked, offering his arm. They strolled through town and out into the countryside, following a path along the river. The evening was mild and pleasant, and Clara was content just to be near him, to feel the solid warmth of his arm beneath her hand. When they reached a spot where wildflowers were just beginning to bloom, Harrison stopped and turned to face her. He looked nervous, more nervous than she had ever seen him, and her heart began to beat faster. Clara, he said, taking both her hands in his, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. When I found you that day in the dust, I had no idea I was finding my future, but that is what you are. You are my future if you will have me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple gold with a small stone set in the center. It was my grandmother's, he said. My father gave it to my mother when they married, and she wanted me to have it to give to my wife someday. Clara Graham, will you marry me? Will you come be my wife? Help me build a life on that little ranch? I know it is not much compared to what you could have here in town, but I promise I will work every day to make you happy, to give you the life you deserve. Clara felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. Yes, she said, her voice breaking on the word. Yes, Harrison, I will marry you. I want nothing more than to be your wife, to build a life with you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking slightly, and then he was pulling her into his arms and kissing her with a passion that made her head spin. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at the same time, Clara felt like her heart might burst from happiness. When? Harrison asked. How soon can we do this? I do not want to wait. I need to finish the school year, Clara said practically, even as every part of her wanted to say tomorrow, today, right now. My students need me, and I gave my word to the town council, but school ends in May. We could marry then. May, Harrison repeated, as if testing the word. That is 3 months. I can wait 3 months. Barely, but I can do it. They made their plans walking back to town, both giddy with excitement. Clara would finish teaching through May, and then she would move out to Harrison's ranch as his wife. She could still teach if she wanted, Harrison assured her. Laredo was not so far that she could not make the ride if the town wanted to keep her on. Or there were children on the surrounding ranches who needed schooling. They would figure it out together. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Laredo, met with genuine happiness from the people who had come to care for Clara. Mrs. Gentry wept with joy and immediately began planning the wedding, insisting it be held in the church with a proper reception to follow. Those final 3 months flew by in a whirlwind of preparation. Clara finished the school year, seeing her students through their final lessons and examinations. Harrison came to town every week now, unable to stay away for longer than that, and they spent every possible moment together, talking and planning and dreaming about their future. In May of 1879, exactly 11 months after Harrison had found Clara collapsed in the dust, they stood together in the small church in Laredo and exchanged vows before God and their community. Clara wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Gentry and several other women had helped her sew, and Harrison wore the green shirt she had made him along with his best trousers and a new hat. He looked impossibly handsome, and when he said, "I do," his voice was strong and sure and filled with love. The reception was joyful and rowdy, with music and dancing that lasted late into the evening. But Clara and Harrison slipped away early, eager to begin their new life together. They rode out to the ranch under a sky full of stars, Clara riding behind Harrison on Duke, her arms wrapped around his waist and her cheek pressed against his back. When they reached the little adobe house, Harrison lifted her down from the saddle and carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition. He set her down gently in the middle of the front room and just looked at her for a long moment, his eyes full of wonder. "My wife," he said softly, as if testing the words. "Clara Quade, how did I get so lucky?" "I am the lucky one," Clara said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "You saved me, Harrison, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," he said, and then he was kissing her, and Clara gave herself over to it, to him, to this new life they were beginning together. The first year of their marriage was not easy. Ranching was hard work, demanding long hours and constant vigilance. Clara learned to rope and brand, to ride hard and fast, to shoot a rifle and fix a fence. Her hands, which had once been soft from city living, became calloused and strong. But she did not mind the work because she was doing it alongside Harrison, building something together. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset, talking about their day, making plans for the future. Harrison taught her about the land, about reading the weather and the seasons, about the delicate balance of raising cattle in this harsh country. Clara taught him about books and ideas, reading aloud to him in the evenings from the small library she had brought with her from St. Louis. They also continued her teaching, though in a different form. Several families on neighboring ranches asked if Clara would tutor their children, and once a week she held lessons in the front room of their house, teaching reading and writing and arithmetic to a small group of eager students. It gave her a sense of purpose beyond the ranch work, and Harrison supported her fully, proud of his educated wife. Their first winter together was cold and difficult, with a late-season blizzard that killed several head of cattle and left them snowed in for a week. But they weathered it together, keeping each other warm and entertained as they waited for the storm to pass. Harrison told stories of his childhood, and Clara taught him to play card games she had learned in St. Louis. And they made love in front of the fire and felt grateful for the solid walls that kept the wind at bay. In the spring, the wildflowers bloomed just as Harrison had promised, carpeting the land in color so vivid it almost hurt to look at. Clara stood in the middle of a field of blue bonnets and Indian paintbrush, her arms outstretched, spinning in circles like a child. Harrison watched her from Duke's saddle, his heart so full he thought it might overflow. That summer, Clara realized she was pregnant. She told Harrison on a warm evening in July, exactly 2 years after he had found her in the dust, and he lifted her up and spun her around, whooping with joy. They held each other on the porch as the sun set. Harrison's hand on her still flat belly, both of them overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had built. Their son was born in March of 1880, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined chin. They named him Henry after Harrison's father, and Harrison cried when he held his son for the first time, overcome with love and responsibility and hope. Clara proved to be a natural mother, patient and attentive and fiercely protective. Harrison was equally devoted, rocking Henry to sleep when he fussed and changing diapers without complaint and marveling at every tiny milestone. The ranch work continued, but now it had even more meaning. They were building something not just for themselves, but for their son, for the future generations that would come after them. As Henry grew from infant to toddler, Clara and Harrison talked about having more children. The ranch was doing well enough now to support a larger family, and they both wanted Henry to have siblings, to know the joy of brothers and sisters that neither of them had fully experienced. Their daughter was born 2 years after Henry, in the spring of 1882. They named her Helen, and she had her mother's light eyes and her father's smile. Henry was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her constantly, and Clara's heart swelled watching her children together. Life settled into a rhythm that was at once ordinary and extraordinary. The work was still hard, the weather still unpredictable, the challenges of ranching still constant. But they faced everything together. Harrison and Clara, partners in every sense of the word. They celebrated successes and weathered failures. They laughed together and occasionally argued, but always made up before they went to sleep. They raised their children with love and discipline, teaching them the value of hard work and the importance of kindness. Years passed, good years and hard years and everything in between. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Harrison hired on more permanent hands as the herd increased, and he built additions onto the house to accommodate their growing family. A third child arrived in 1884, another boy they named Hugh, and then a final daughter, Hope, in 1887. 4 children, a thriving ranch, a house full of love and laughter and the noise of everyday life. Sometimes Clara would stop in the middle of her day and just look around, overwhelmed by how far she had come from that girl in the St. Louis tenement, who had been so desperate for something better that she had risked everything And sometimes she would look at Harrison and see him watching her with that same expression he had worn the first time he looked at her, back when she was too weak to lift her own head, and he had cradled her so gently and fed her soup. That look of tenderness, of wonder, of deep and abiding love. "What are you thinking?" she would ask, and he would always smile. "That I am the luckiest man alive," he would say. "That finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me." "You saved my life," Clara would remind him, as she had reminded him countless times over the years. "And you gave me a reason to live it," he would always reply. In the summer of 1895, on their 16th wedding anniversary, Harrison and Clara sat on the porch of their ranch house and watched their children play in the yard. Henry was 15 now, tall and strong and learning to run the ranch alongside his father. Helen was 13, already showing signs of the beauty she would become, smart as a whip, and determined to go to college someday. Hugh was 11, all energy and mischief and laughter. And Hope, at 8, was the baby, though she hated being called that. Fierce and independent, and already an excellent rider. "We did all right," Harrison said, taking Clara's hand in his. "Did we not?" "We did better than all right," Clara said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We did wonderfully." She thought back to that day in July of 1878 when she had collapsed in the dust, certain she was dying, certain her story was ending before it had really begun. She thought about Harrison riding up on Duke, about the feel of his hand supporting her head as he gave her water and soup, about the gentleness in his eyes that had made her want to trust him even when she knew better than to trust anyone. That moment had changed everything. It had been the beginning of a love story that had shaped the rest of her life, that had given her everything she had dreamed of and so much more than she had ever dared to imagine. A home, a family, a partner who loved her unconditionally and whom she loved in return. A life rich with purpose and meaning and joy. "Tell me again," Hope said, running up to the porch, her face flushed from playing. "Tell me how you and Papa met." It was a story Clara had told 100 times, a story her children never tired of hearing. She looked at Harrison and he grinned, nodding for her to go ahead. "Well," Clara said, pulling Hope into her lap, even though the girl was getting too big for it. "It was a very hot day in July, and I was walking to Laredo all by myself, which was not very smart of me." "You were brave," Hope interrupted, as she always did. "I was desperate," Clara corrected gently. "But yes, I was also brave, and I got very sick from the heat and the lack of water, so sick that I fell down in the dust and could not even lift my head. I thought that was the end of my story. But then your papa came riding up on Duke, and he saw me lying there, and instead of riding past, he stopped." "Because Papa is a hero," Hugh chimed in, coming to sit on the porch steps. "Because your Papa has a good heart," Clara said. "He lifted my head so gently, and he gave me water and soup, and he took care of me until I was strong enough to travel again, and somewhere in those few days I fell in love with him." "And Papa fell in love with you," Helen added, joining them now along with Henry. "That is right," Harrison said, his arm coming around Clara's shoulders. "I fell in love with your mother because she was brave and strong and determined, and because she had the most beautiful eyes I had ever seen. And you got married and lived happily ever after," Hope concluded, as she always did. "And we got married and lived happily ever after," Clara agreed, looking around at her family, at the ranch they had built together, at the life they had created out of dust and desperation and determination. "The happiest ever after I could have imagined." As the sun set over the Texas landscape, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, the Quade family sat together on their porch and watched the day fade into evening. 4 children, 2 parents, one love story that had begun with an act of simple kindness on a dusty trail and had grown into something beautiful and lasting and true. Clara reached over and squeezed Harrison's hand, and he squeezed back, and no words were needed. They knew what they had built together. They knew how lucky they were, how easily things could have gone differently, but they had found each other, had chosen each other, and had committed to building a life together no matter what challenges came. And that, in the end, was what mattered most. Not the size of the ranch or the number of cattle or any measure of material success. What mattered was this: love, family, the everyday choice to show up for each other, to lift each other up when one fell down, to offer soup and water and gentleness when the world was harsh and unforgiving. Years would continue to pass. There would be weddings for their children, grandchildren to spoil, new challenges to face as the old century gave way to the new. But through it all, Harrison and Clara would remain partners, lovers, best friends. They would grow old together on their little ranch, watching the wildflowers bloom each spring, sitting on their porch each evening, holding hands and remembering that hot July day when their story began. And when they were very old, when their children and grandchildren would gather around and ask about the secret to a long and happy marriage, they would smile at each other and Harrison would say, "Love is action. It is choosing to stop when you could ride past. It is lifting someone's head when they cannot lift it themselves. It is offering soup to a stranger and seeing not a burden but a blessing." And Clara would add, "Love is trust. It is letting yourself be vulnerable, letting someone care for you when you have been alone for so long. It is taking a chance on connection, even when you have every reason to protect your heart. It is saying yes to the future, even when the past has taught you to expect nothing." Together they would conclude, love is both simple and profound. It is grand gestures and quiet moments. It is building a life together one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of kindness at a time. And it all starts with seeing another person, really seeing them, and deciding they are worth stopping for. That was the legacy Clara and Harrison Quade left behind. Not just a successful ranch or a large family, but a love story that inspired everyone who knew them. A reminder that sometimes the most important moment of your life happens when you least expect it, on a dusty trail under a merciless sun, when one person decides to stop and help instead of riding past. A reminder that we save each other, if we are willing to try, and that happy endings are possible, even when they seem impossibly far away, even when you are too tired to lift your own head, even when all hope seems lost. Sometimes all it takes is one person with a gentle touch and a kind heart to change everything, to turn an ending into a beginning, to transform despair into hope. For Clara Graham Quade, that person had been Harrison, riding up on his bay gelding with water and soup and infinite patience. For Harrison, it had been Clara, brave and determined and beautiful, even covered in dust and nearly dead from exhaustion. They had found each other against all odds in the vast emptiness of the Texas wilderness, and they had built something that lasted. Something real and true and good, and that was the best happy ending of all.